I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Pleased to meet you.
And yes, maybe you could just start by giving us a brief introduction to this wonderful film, Farewell Amor.
Yeah, thank you. Farewell Amor is my feature directorial debut. It's a film about a family that's been separated for over 17 years due to visa immigration issues. And at the top of the film, they reunite in Brooklyn in New York after this long time. And we journey with them as they discover themselves and each other and using the tool of dance as a way to do that.
And it's both a very specific story, original and specific story, but also has something about the experience of being an immigrant in America. So what inspired you to take that theme and then also delve into this very specific set of characters?
Well, the story itself is inspired by the relationship of an aunt and uncle of mine who have been separated due to visa immigration issues since the mid 90s. Have been in touch. Uncle sends money. Auntie's built a house. My cousin's in college now. And they've been forever hopeful that one day they will be reunited, but it hasn't happened yet. And so watching them and sort of how it's changed their lives, how it's changed the larger family's life, and the kinds of people that they've turned into as they've tried to remain hopeful was just very interesting to me. And I wanted to tell that story. So initially, when I started working on this project, I was under the impression that it was a very singular experience, that nobody else would ever be able to relate to this crazy situation. But it's been really interesting how over the time that we've shown this, there have been so many people who, from all walks of life, not even just Africans, but, people from Asia, people from Europe, people from all over the place who have had something similar, something very, 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 very much the same. So being able to tell that story has been really gratifying for me. But it did start from just like a very specific sort of whispered story in our family about, my aunt and uncle and the inspiration of what would their life be like if they were finally able to reunite.
Mm. And I guess what makes it particularly interesting is that it's not sort of a clear cut, love story or, just like happy endings, they're reunited and everything runs smoothly. There's so many layers of complexity there. And even though they're reunited, each have followed their different paths. Mothers turn to God. The daughter feels estranged. So was that something you also wanted to explore, that these things aren't always straightforward and bring out the different layers that are at play in a story such as this?
Absolutely. And that was something that as I was writing it became abundantly clear to me, that as I put myself in each character's shoes, they're all three of them are experiencing the same event, which is the reunion that they've all been praying for. Yay, we made it. But their experience of that event is very, very particular to who they are, who they've become. And then, it's the same with a long distance relationship, like a romantic relationship, or if you travel a lot for work, or if you've been in the army or something of that nature. It's like you have an idea of who the person that you've left behind is, and what they mean to you and what they would do or never do. And you also have an idea of who you are. And sometimes you don't quite realize how much you've changed and certainly how much they've changed until you're together and like, you love spaghetti, right? And they're like, oh my God, I hate spaghetti, whatever it is. So that was actually a really fun exercise of putting myself in everybody's shoes and trying to think from that perspective of like, what would this be like?
And that's sort of given birth then to this quite unique structure of kind of a bit of repetition, but from these different perspectives. So was
Yeah.
that, where did you get that idea from? Were you drawing any other films or directors? Or was that something that you just felt really lend itself well to the story?
Well, I did, I made a short prequel movie to this before we embarked on the feature. I made a short prequel called Farewell Amor, that was from Walter's perspective, and it was the moment before he goes to the airport to meet his family. And so that was sort of the initial story that I had in my head. But then just kind of felt a little cliche, a story about a guy who had an affair. How many times have we seen that? So so then I was kind of like, well, maybe the daughter's perspective, that might be more interesting. However, his perspective is a bit unique because he is trying to be faithful to the family. So initially I had just planned to have the two of them, the father and the daughter story. And then, 6 to 8 months into writing it, it became so clear that the mom was she was such a linchpin in both of their stories and the trajectory of where they head, that I had to include hers as well. So it was a little bit of an indecisiveness as to like who to make the lead character. And I was like, I'll make all of them the lead character. That would be great.
And thinking of the themes that this does touch upon, being an immigrant specifically in America, and then thinking of the context that this film is, being released into Trump's America, the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, really seeing a surge. How do you think that this story plays out into that context?
I feel like when I was developing this story, there was so much excitement or anticipation about it being a story about immigration policy, about what the government is doing or is not doing to immigrants. And I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to make it sort of like a bad government kind of movie, because I feel like then that becomes the stories about like all these horrible things that are happening to people. And also that tends to be so much of the conversation about immigrants is like, look at the burden that they are, look at all the resources that they're taking from us, look at all the, oh my God, our health system is going to collapse because of all these foreigners coming in and doing X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. And we never really get to talk about foreigners, immigrants, as people who bring things to our communities, people who work, first of all, like work so hard, and also what they've left behind, like what they've had to do and become in order to even be here. Like nobody anywhere in the world would prefer to leave their loving home and families and everybody else just to like struggle in some foreign land. Like that's not a thing. But if you listen to the news and all of the rhetoric, you would think it were a thing. And so I really just wanted to focus on like the people and like, let's consider who these people are and what they've had to overcome in order to be here in the first place, and New York being such a great place to discuss any kind of immigrants, because it's a city of immigrants, is just wonderful because you get to see. I mean, if you're just thinking about taxi drivers, in my story, Walter's a taxi driver. Most taxi drivers in New York are hugely skilled, doctors and lawyers and architects, and have all these professional jobs in their home countries, and have had to do this because that's survival and they're trying to make a way for their families. So just really trying to shift the way that we think about Black people, about foreigner Black people. And of course, now going up against all of the noise around Trump and election and all of those things, I'm proud to be able to lend my voice to that.
And kind of expose people to this rich cultural thing that happens when people bring things, thinking of the music and dance aspects that come through in the film, with the specificity of Brooklyn and how that becomes almost like a melting pot, and there's all the great stuff that's able to come out of that immigrant experience.
Yeah, exactly. I've never seen a film about Angolan immigrants. I'm not from Angola. I've never been. I do not speak Portuguese either, but I do love kizomba dancing, which is the style of dance that Walter does, and kuduro is the style that Sylvia does, that are both from Angola. And I've spent a lot of time practicing and sort of being in that world of all sorts of foreign people, from the islands, from all, different walks of life, who've all loved this culture and this music. And so wanting to add that to the conversation to the cinema conversation too, because we hardly ever see stories about Angolans, mostly I think because of language barriers, which was an interesting challenge to overcome as well. But wanting to bring them and their music and some of their history to the table, as well as, you know, the fact that Angola is a place in the world where most of the Cold War actually took place physically. You know, Americans love talking about the Cold War, but that wasn't a war that was actually fought in America. It was fought in Angola, a lot of it, where a lot of Angolan people suffered, and the outfall is part of the outfall is what we're seeing now, where families are separated, and we continue to see in places like Syria and all these other places in the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and best of luck for this film at the London Film Festival. I'm sure it'll be incredibly received.